right, everybody. Thanks for joining while we're waiting. I believe there are many other sessions going on this week, and feel free to register for other sessions. I know the Improving group is trying to get the strongest attendance they can for this week's activities. And while we're getting started, I'd just like to thank the group from Improving and creating the EDGE conference. It was nice to be invited to cover today's presentation, which I hope is entertaining for each and every one of you. I tried to make it fun. We all go through a number of presentations, especially in the era of COVID, and it's more exciting to make them collaborative. So one of my challenges and goals to you today is to make sure you interact with me as best you can. Unfortunately, I'm not able to see you, but you will see that I have a couple things that I ask you to participate with me in. And when we do, I'll ask you to throw something in the chat just to know that you're getting and receiving some fun feedback and learnings from today's session. So once again, thanks for having me here today. My name is David Charney. I plan to cover the topic of extreme business growth with a musical twist. For those that read the description to the session, I tried to show that I have an interest in music and I like to listen to music of all types. I've had music as a part of my life for most of my life. And so I tried to throw a couple little twists into the presentation today in order to make it a little bit more interesting and a little less dry. I'll try to get off the script and get off the PowerPoint a little bit just to make it dynamic for myself and also for you as the participant. And as I said earlier, I will also ask you to participate in 3 different very short activities to try to make it interesting. So thanks for having me. I hope you guys have a great conference. In terms of logistics for this hour, I will be very conscious of time. I will try to wrap up about 55 after the hour to make sure you guys have time and rest for the next Zoom and if you're going to other sessions or meetings after this. So I'll do my best to be respectful of your time. Also, I do encourage any questions you have. You're welcome to throw them into the chat session throughout the presentation, as long as they're on topic. If you have just an interesting question for me, I would love you to ask it. Maybe save it towards the end for the Q&A session, just so we can kind of keep a thread going and I can stay on time for everybody. So thank you. Without further ado, I think the participant list has stayed stable now, and I will get started with the presentation. So thanks for having me, David Charney once again, and let's dive in, shall we? So assuming you guys can all see my screen correctly, and I would appreciate the first person that can shoot a message into the chat message just to share with me that you're able to see my screen okay. That will show me that all the technology is working here. Awesome. Very, very responsive from Nick and Rocio and Nathaniel. Thank you very much. Let's dive in, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. So are we talking business today or are we talking music? Let's play with it a little bit. Are you guys part of a band? Guys and gals, are you part of a band? A band has what? It has a vibe. It has a story of origin. It has a direction. Where do they want to go and why? Some band members like harmonious music. Those of you that are Eagles fans or like the bands that get into a 3, 4, 5-point harmony, it's an unbelievable experience when a band's in sync. Other band members, as you know from pop culture and the media and decades of great music, are that some band members want to be rock stars. And so a big part of change management and a big part of extreme business growth is learning the personalities around you and trying to accommodate change as you fly the machine you're trying to alter in its path. So today's threads will have some musical twists, and I will play on both growth lessons learned as well as some change management lessons from the street. All right, so are you part of a band? I hope you all feel like you're part of a band. There could be a very wide range of resources on this call. So I leverage you to think carefully on how you fit in your band, what kind of personality you have, and those kinds of things. All right, moving forward, here we go. So why are we talking about music today? Businesses are like bands. Here's my discography. For those that don't know, that's my musical career in business terms. I did 5 years working for AmerisourceBergen. It's a Fortune 10 company, a couple $100 billion in sales per year. I was part of a very small and elite team that built their enterprise data warehouse. It was a very positive experience pretty soon after university college and business school. And it allowed me to understand the value that data plays in business. For this particular company, it was a very low margin, high volume business. So having tight procedures was very critical to the business, and that allowed me to be very valuable to the organization very quickly. I went through a number of neat projects there that I don't have time to share with you today on, but if anybody's interested in that 5 years of my career, follow with me after. Second 5 years of my career, I went into consulting. I did specifically what's called business intelligence consulting. This was helping companies with building reporting strategies, understand the data. For those that are very familiar with ERP systems, enterprise resource planning machines that large businesses put in. I was once told by a CIO, it sort of eats like an elephant and poops like a mouse. And the concept there is that you spend a lot of money and effort, energy trying to get your business aligned with the system. You want to make sure you get the outputs you want out of it. Simple things, dashboards, graphs, top 10 reports, exception reporting. Those are all things you want to get out of your data set. In the last 10 years, and probably one of the more interesting parts of my career, was helping my family founded a company called Stealth Monitoring. And today it is the largest video surveillance company in North America. I will spend a slide or two on that to give you a little bit more detail and to share with you the kinds of war and growth stories that I've been through in my career in the last 10 years. But the neat thing about that story is it was sort of from ground up. And now you're looking at a company with more than 1,000 employees and 33 offices, and a great partnership from a entrepreneurial family into partnerships, and then even private equity firms, all with alignment in our incentives and our goals, and it continues to thrive today. So very proud of the Stealth that we created, as well as the Stealth that's today a much larger organization that my brother and my father and I started. And it's an interesting situation to work in family businesses, and ours worked very well. You hear all kinds of stories, but I think we're very proud of what we've done, and I'm sure you can read about it in the media. So in terms of musical instruments, and I'm trying to keep this actually business focused, I see the business process through data. I need to understand, how does a customer engage with you? How do they interact? How do they understand what the solution is? How do we implement it? How do we service it? How do we ensure service levels? I have to understand the business through a process. I need to understand that on a whiteboard, a diagram, a visual, by talking to customers. And then I like to see the data below that layer that sort of tells the story. So in terms of bands, I'd like to say that my band members would say David can connect the dots like no other. He's an extroverted lead sound engineer. I might not be the strongest musician. In some cases I can get deep, but in reality, I think I play the role of kind of the mixer of the group, and sort of a load balancer and kind of a personality balancer. I find that sometimes in my family and sometimes in business, and I think it's a skill set I'm not great at, but I tried to continue to work on it professionally and personally. So, all right, let's dive into some more fun stuff. Is anybody ready for an activity? Hopefully, yes. For the first activity, I'd like every one of you to write in the chat room at this moment if you are wearing a watch. I want one of three things. Is it, I am not wearing a watch, I am wearing a traditional watch, or I am wearing a smartwatch? So one of those three things would be great. And I want to just watch the chat. If you guys are looking in the chat, I can see, nope, traditional watch, not wearing a watch. I'll tell you a funny story while these chats come in. I had an older gentleman 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, share with me in business that in the older generations, dressing up meant a formality. It also meant a sense of integrity in business. And nowadays, wearing a watch doesn't seem to be quite the same status quo. I tend to wear a watch on my right hand, and I am a super gadget nerd guy that flies drones, Part 107, all kinds of nerdy things. But I wear a fairly censored watch, a Dassault T-Touch, for those that know. I've been wearing it since first generation. And here's where the activity comes in. The reason I wear a watch is because that old gentleman said to me, in the old days, a person that wears a watch, a person that gets dressed up, is somebody that you should do business with, as opposed to somebody you shouldn't. And even though people of my generation, let's call it in their early 40s or younger, tend to be more mobile, agile, smart, different generation than almost myself, it seems to be that older people might have a little bit of that lingering culture. So for that reason, I wear a watch. And here is what somebody told me 25 years ago. For those of you that are wearing a watch, please do this activity. For those that are not, just imagine it. Take off your watch from the hand that you normally wear it on, whichever hand that is. switch it to the other side. Very simple process. I happen to be right-handed, but I wear my watch on my right hand generally, so now it's on my left hand. Putting a watch on your opposite hand is not a big deal. The question I have for you is, does anybody want to guess, chat room is welcome, how many days the average person takes to wake up in the morning and look at the correct hand, whenever it is that they look at their watch first? So I'll wait for a couple responses in the chat room here. Anissa, you hit the right answer first. You might have heard something along the lines. The answer I was told was 21 days on average. So pretty impressive for those that I see 20, 22. It looks like some pretty solid answers there. So I appreciate the involvement from all of you guys. New habits, new behaviors. I'm sure you guys have heard the basic psychology. This is my level 1 activity, and I'll bring it up a notch here in a few minutes. So thank you for the participation in the watch activity. I appreciate all the chat room activity there. Okay, just a quick case study. This is particularly an example of Stealth's growth. It's not the only business I've been a part of, but it was a nice case study that I'd like to show. And I like the chat room references here to generational differences, and maybe an older guy saying, I wear a watch only when I go out socially, when I go out. That's fun. So very cool. All right, so the case study. Small business here in Dallas, Texas. I happen to be in Dallas, where I believe you guys are all over the country, so it's kind of cool with the different time zones. Where could the band drive a truck? That was kind of where we did business. So what did we do? We started a business where we watched people's cameras. Yes, we do install them nationwide now, and for 8 to 9 years now. But in reality, we did it wherever we could drive our truck. So we very much looked like the band that would shove all their equipment, their drum sets in, kind of go do the gig and head on home. That was kind of the beginning of where we started a small business. 2 years later, we created standard procedures. We started to figure out the single source of truth, meaning the single system of record. And we started to say yes to business around the country. How did we do that? Somebody like you or somebody that owned a business would call and say, I'd like to watch my property. Somebody just stole copper. I'm spending a lot of money on guards, or I'm getting theft or breaking issues, and it's bothering my business. It's stopping my business. So we figured out a way to hop on a plane, survey their site for them, pick up partners in that market that could do the field work for us, and install and service it. So 2 years later, now we're in 25 states, right? We have 100 employees. We're growing. The time the business was right here, my 9-year-old was born. I've got 3 kids, and my 9-year-old son was born here. At this point, my 8-year-old son was born. Just turned 8-year-old son was born, and it shows sort of a growth story here, which will lead to the rest of my presentation. 2 years later after that, we were 180 employees. We had customers in 35, 38 states. We were arresting 500 people per year. One of the great pleasures of being involved with this business, even to this day, is that any nonprofit has that warm, fuzzy feeling that you're doing something good for society. And Stealth Monitoring, while it is certainly a for-profit business, we always had the chance to hire somebody with talent, knowing that our morals, our values, and our integrity were set around doing something good for the world, right? We're helping prevent crime. We're helping with personal safety. We certainly have lots and lots of events per year. Some of them are unfortunate to see on camera, but needless to say, it was a nice perk being involved with a business that you could stand proud of. You could share with a religious leader, whatever it was something you could stand proud about. And I think that's something that we as a company and as a team take as part of our culture forward, even through the multiple generations of M&A that have gone on. We merged with really nice partners out of Canada, and we became all of a sudden 650 employees a couple years later. Even more offices, more countries we're operating in. It was just a neat growth story. And then in modern era, in the last few months, we're now hitting 1,100 employees, 33 offices, 50,000 cameras we watch every night. And I think we are rated the 15th largest security company in America. And that's an unbelievable feat from where we started. And also I should acknowledge that the security industry has a lot of guard companies with really high revenue dollars. We're talking about 15th largest security company in that space where, we're not billion-dollar guard companies. So it's kind of an interesting story from itself. All right, so that gives you a little background. Let me jump into the next slide here. In terms of just a little bit of M&A background, and I'm just trying to help give myself a little street credit so you sort of answer the question of why am I listening to this David guy? This is just a couple of the M&A deals or transactions or mergers that I've been a part of. I worked for AOL Time Warner in New York City in 2001 in the middle of that merger. Some would argue that wasn't maybe a successful merger. Amerisource in Bergen-Brunswick, I came in at the tail end of that. Very interesting, very successful company for sure. Consultant and advised on many deals, and C-suite going to jail. I had to fly on an airplane when I was a consultant to, I'll leave the city and the company out of it, but Wall Street Journal put a whole management team in jail. I was kind of brought in as part of a team to help sort of keep the systems alive and going and kind of keep anything from falling out and under in the business. Wanted to keep the core revenue stream going and not sort of make any rapid or drastic decisions. So very interesting project work. I was a part of more than a dozen high-end, high-profile, sort of high-stress projects. And it led to a lot of business exposure that I really enjoyed, a lot of connections, a lot of industries. And I think that's something that's allowed me to learn how to quickly adopt to a team dynamic, understand the culture of the team, and make sure that I know my role on that team as quick as I can. And then just most recently, Stealth, we've actually sold the company multiple times and acquired a company. So been a part of multiple transactions, just sort of with my own sort of company, if you will, and now part of a much bigger, badder team. All right, so you've all seen these sort of figurative, academic PowerPoint slides. I tend to want to be a people person and do things with a whiteboard session or on a scratch sheet of paper. But in order to adopt today's format, I wanted to show you a very simple slide. So you see change as a constant motion. I think you all have gone through whatever level of change in your lives, personally or professionally. And obviously today's theme is professionally. And this simple wheel on the right side shows the kind of story. You listen to your customers, they have a need, they want you to solve it. You have a process, you have data and systems in order to solve it. You have people that have to have the right training, the right experience, the right knowledge of how to do their jobs, use the tools that they have, be creative, escalate correctly, be on top of their measures of performance. And you've got to create the culture that we work together on this. Okay, I can't tell you how often I go through situations where let's be open, honest, tell the customer what we did wrong, let's fix it, let's make them right, and let's set the culture that we're here to be their long-term partner. And I'll refrain from commenting on the chat room there, but I think there are different size organizations, and I like the nimbleness of a small sort of family-owned business. And I think as a company scales, it's tricky to both scale and keep your nimbleness. So that's a challenge we as leaders all face. So I will be referencing multiple levels. I obviously have to adopt and accommodate my storyline today to all levels, but obviously every one of you is a manager, a leader of some way, of your family, of your own work area. You're also possibly an employee or a subordinate to somebody. So I'm going to use the terms of employee, manager, leader, entrepreneur somewhat interchangeably for today's purposes. If anybody wants to talk more specifically about their personal experiences or something you're going through on one of these topics, I'm more than happy to get more specific offline. But I just wanted to kind of cover that as a context. So why do I show you this spinning wheel? Hopefully you guys can see the spinning wheel on the right side, because this to me is closer to reality, right? It's always kind of shaking, spinning, that it's not constant. It's not just sitting so nice and clean that you can stare at the PowerPoint, right? It's actually a spinning wheel. So the desires that the customers have are always changing. I apologize, it keeps flipping back on me. But the customer's desires are changing. The process and data tools need to keep up. The people have to adopt. Some people go against the change and are resistant and are frustrating or frustrated. And others need to be change agents. And I'll give you some quotes throughout this thing. But I think if you can solve a need, you have a simple business, you'll get by really well. In terms of being a change agent, I think the most important line I can give you is you can be a change agent, else change might just happen around you. So my general strategy on change is become a part of it, be proactive, and get on your toes instead of sitting on your heels, for those that understand sports analogies. I referenced a couple musical quotes here just because I thought these were kind of relevant songs that had a lot of commentary about a relevant change here. All right, moving forward, our second activity, this is probably my favorite activity. Once again, I'm going to ask you, without being able to see you, to look at your hands, put them together. Everybody can do this. All right, you got your hands out in front of you, maybe in front of your face or just in front of your body. Put them flat. So I'm going to just turn to the side so you see. Put them flat together like you just finished clapping for a good presenter somewhere. And I want you to drop your fingers together so that you're clamping on to your own hands. Okay? So I'll just do that again so everybody's with me. Your hands are together, and then you're going to naturally put your fingers together, fingers tied together. I'm assuming not a single one of you can chat right now because you're all finger tied. Now, in this case, and ignore cameras and mirrors and all the things we're doing over the internet here, but it happens to be my right pinky is below my left one, okay? So that's what feels right to me, okay? I don't know, but I want you to right now look at whatever pinky's sticking out and just make a mental note. Is that my right or my left? No big deal, but just which one came first for you? Make sure you know that answer, okay? So everybody now knows their hands are together and they know which pinky is kind of the first. Now watch carefully on camera here. I am gonna do something very revolutionary. And I'm gonna switch and make my fingers go the other way. Okay, so what that looks like is my hands are here. Just sort of kind of loosen them up, switch them, put them back together. Okay, how does that make you feel? I have no psychology training, no formal training at least, other than being a dad, but does that feel a little bit awkward to you? Odd, weird, gross, uncomfortable? This is a great group. I love it. Keep them coming. Okay? So you know that having your hands one way or the other is the same exact physical putting your hands together. Okay? Your brain remembers a shortcut. Your brain says the fastest path, the easiest way I know how to put my hands together is the way you did it first. Okay? Being good at change is being able to put your hands on the other way or wear your watch in the other hand. It's being able to perceive what is going on around you. And some things are worth going along with, and other things are worth adopting for or making a comment about. In this case, in this exercise, the uncomfortable feeling of putting your hands the other way is only a problem in your brain. It is not a physical problem unless anybody is finger handicapped. And once again, I apologize, but the concept here is that your ability to feel good about something and feel different about something or awkward about something is only a mental game of saying, let's put this in perspective. So anytime you're not sure how it feels in business, you're not sure what's going on, you're going to sync up with your team, you're going to sync up with your bosses, get aligned with the investors, whatever it takes, switch your hands around and just remember that being a change agent, being a part of the team that makes the change happen is a lot better than being part of the team that receives change. So join forces, however that is. If you don't find you're an extroverted person and you're not the one that's going to kind of gather the troops, no problem. Maybe you contribute in a different way by helping document what the procedures are today or current status quo before you make the change. There's a way to be involved and accepting of change, and that activity was designed to show you that difference. So thanks for all the commentary. Someone just said I invented pinky exercises. I'm gonna have to share that with my 4-year-old. I've never really thought of it that way, and I'm not even sure I've ever used the word pinky in doing this exercise, but basically I thought that was a nice, simple exercise we could do over the Zoom, and I'm glad a couple people here are giving me some credit. All right, so we move on. That was the hands exercise. War story. For those that run in businesses that understand operational delivery and whatever that means to your business, meaning actually taking care of the customer and putting in the revenue or servicing a customer, this slide's kind of an example or a testament to that experience. Many years ago at Stealth, we landed an account almost by accident, but by doing the right things and being known for something. And they gave us 2.5 years worth of sales in a single spreadsheet email. So in this particular case, it was a sort of like a large order or an extremely large order. And on one hand, you could look at this like, oh my gosh, I have no idea how we're going to do this. And it's going to break every part of our business. And in another way, you say, holy moly, if in fact we can do this, if we can find a way to do this, then we're going to absolutely kill it in a good way for our company and for our investors and for our returns of our company and for bonus pools for our employees and that kind of thing. In this case, we did a ton of work, and it really kind of put a little bit of stress on every area of the business. We had to grow certain departments kind of erratically, and we had to invent departments, kind of for the first time. And so it was an experience that I would never forget. I still have all the war stories and the rush documentation and traveling every day, every week for 6 months. And it was impressive to see the results. And it's something that you sort of can't really explain as I do here on a slide. Kind of becoming a parent for the first time is not something that's so easy to explain either. But basically, being able to do what you didn't think was possible. And here's what worked before I even read the slide itself. We had a simple process and we didn't deviate from it. Okay, you could tend to panic in a rush and shortcut it and skip steps. But we put in the hard blood and sweat, the energy, to maintain a process that we knew already worked. And we did that in order to make sure we were successful for both ourselves and for our customers. In this case, we hadn't figured out a way to yet be a national company at this scale. And this customer completely took us there. And so we hit the road, we hired extra project managers. One specific situation I was in, I was debating between hiring kind of A and B as kind of bullet two here, between one person and another. And I looked over to my family who we ran and owned the whole company and said, which one should I hire? And they go, both. And I give credit to them to this day that I'm not even sure we would have survived without them both. And that's the kind of stories that you're just thinking about in the middle of a rush and a push. And it's important when you're in a push to have the best people you possibly can around you, helping you make your decisions smart, especially when you're feeling stressed or panicked. So my summary in that was trust your instincts. Your instincts are right. Just follow your intuition, as somebody says here in the chat, but also make sure that you stick with it. And if you don't know, slow down. If you trust your instincts, go with them. If you don't, slow down and get the right people in the room to make the call. The more important the task, the more important you have to have the best resource to help you make that task. Value the street experience very highly, but channel your understanding. What does that mean? I kind of referenced Ocean's 11, the movie. Value the street experience. Somebody in your team, somebody you hire, somebody who's been with your company or has worked for you for many years is gonna have more experience about how to do this particular thing. But you as a leader need to get to a level of understanding that you can trust that person, but also be able to decide on your own over time what inputs did that person need in order to make that call with such confidence, leveraging their experience. Okay? All right. Working on your core. Let's see, we're a little past the halfway checkpoint on time. So feel free to ask any questions throughout this thing if you're on topic, but I'm a little past halfway on my slides. Some wisdom and some advice, best practices. The main principles here is do what you do it well. Whatever you personally do well, whatever your team does well, whatever your company does well, find out and simplify that process and do them extremely well. Okay, I've seen a lot of companies spread too thin, get hyper departmentalized, hyper focused, in silos. And then there's a little bit more of a confusion, point figuring and accountability issues. Make sure you optimize your performance. Make sure you measure it. Make sure you're auditing it. The things that you do well, you have to keep them doing well. It's like keeping the train on the tracks. If you do something well, or if your company does something well, or if your business process does something well, find out how to measure performance really tightly with that, and then measure it so that it stays there. If you've got competent leadership around you, then start to step away. Let them do their thing. Have a performance measure or two that makes sure the performance is there so you can step away. If you've got the right leadership there, you've got the right team members, let them run with it. As long as you've got the right controls in place, audit them occasionally, and you keep a measure as to how they do it. Let them run as much as they want with it. Where the accountability comes in is making sure it's crystal clear who owns what and where the scope ends from left to right and top to bottom. I can't explain how many times in my career, especially in the consulting days, even at Stealth, but anywhere else, it's not crystal clear. You need to make sure it's crystal clear. This party owns it. This group owns it. How are we going to make sure that they understand that? Make them communicate externally that they fully own it and are accountable for it. And that's got to be fair. It's got to be fair to everybody. Another cultural thing that I think is best practice is creating a culture that opens the air, that clears the air. What does that mean? You've heard of the 800-pound gorilla in the room, or being transparent. I've heard the word vulnerability. There's all kinds of words for it. But basically, I hope you, your team, your leadership are creating a culture that encourages people to speak out. There's a professional way to do it, right? Saying, hey, you suck, or you did a poor job is not nice and not constructive in your feedback. So being open-minded, setting the right environment from which to do it, maybe feeding the positive bank account of credit, emotional bank account, before you hit them with a negative, but doing it in a professional manner with intention of being helpful and being sincere and being able to be part of the solution in solving it, not just complaining about it. Okay? Keep it simple, stupid. I think you've heard that a couple times from me already today. I believe in not overcomplicating the process. I often hear the word over-engineered. It's kind of the infamous Rube Goldberg project that I remember from high school AP Physics. Not making it 57 steps when it only needs to be 3. Eliminate the noise, keep it simple, make sure it moves smoothly and easily. And the most professional and profound advice I can give you around change management as it relates to being able to grow quickly is set the measures up before you make the change and document the success. Let me say that differently and slowly. Set up the measure, start tracking it, make the change you want to make, and then follow the results. All too often, we see changes being made without measuring before, and then after the fact, they're saying, well, I don't know, we measured it differently back in the day. So being able to set up a measure so that you're successful with whatever you've got is a key part of the criteria. Feel free to fire any questions. I see a couple people in the chat just mentioning a couple things, best practice, cost-effective, competitive customers. Absolutely. I think best-in-class companies don't necessarily model themselves around somebody else in their space. They might learn from somebody else while they're getting their speed up. But if you've ever worked for a company or an initiative or had a goal where you were kind of number one or trend setting in your space, which I certainly feel like that with Stealth, you can kind of cover all of these major topics if you keep the process simple, straightforward, and don't overcomplicate things. Bring in the right measures, bring in the right team, set up the right culture. No secrets that you haven't been told before, you haven't read about before, and probably tried yourself. So hopefully that helps with best practices and working on the core. So moving to the next slide. Okay, there we go. All right, band members, where do the people come into this? If anybody's been in a situation where you've got an interesting dynamic, whether it's I certainly don't need the person's name, but if you've ever had a sort of superlative or maybe an appropriate word for this group, kind of the complainer or a crazy leader, any of those kinds of words that you've dealt with, please feel free in the chat to fire off a couple examples of kind of these stereotypical interesting parties to work with, right? Even departments can be interesting. Oh, it's just a sales guy, or oh, he's a technology guy. He just doesn't know how to speak to the customer. If you've got any examples you'd like to share in terms of the stereotypical person in business that can be hesitant to change, please feel free to shoot it in the chat. So in terms of content here, instinctual decision makers are what? They're people that like to shoot off the hip, okay? So instinctual decision makers can be helpful, right? In certain small businesses where a lot of decisions need to be made quickly and they need to be nimble, where they're in stressful situations, where they're time bucketed, where you're in a critical juncture and you just have to make a call and you don't have time to do thorough research. An instinctual decision sometimes is forced. Sometimes an instinctual decision is needed just for the situation. Other times, the opposite can happen, right? Structured planners. It's that person that likes to study it all, study it 5 different ways, build a spreadsheets, detail it out, figure out the low, medium, high scenarios, figure out the risky situations, upside, bottom side potentials, maybe put a value on each one of them. The instinctual decision maker fears the effort and energy they have to put in to do it right? To slow down and take their time. The structured planner can't stand the off the hip decision maker who tends to just kind of wing it. Okay, so I tend to say that if you've got personalities that will tend to be at one end of a polar line, a linear line, partner them with the opposite. Okay, why do I say that? Because good things can come out when people respect each other for different approaches. Okay, and I think it's a great example of trying to have people respect each other's process and procedure. Sometimes very, very large decision, dollar perspective, any long-term decisions, you really, really hope that you can make a structured decision in that situation. Whereas which color you're going to paint the back of the truck bumper could be an instinctual decision and the penalties aren't so high. So being able to learn and decide both ways and somewhere in the middle is often the right answer is a good experience, not for somebody who's instinctual to naturally become a structured planner or vice versa, but really to make them slide their progress bar in one direction towards others. So they have an alternate approach other than always winging it or always going so structured. Okay. I'll never forget taking a trip. I'm in kind of a CEO president's club, kind of a global networking organization. And they're kind of a lot of type A personalities, meaning they want to know exactly, it's all scheduled in their Outlook. And we take an annual retreat. I've been doing it with this particular group for about 8 years straight. And it was my turn to plan the retreat one year. It was right before, a year before COVID. So it was sort of normal travel still. And everybody was like, where are we going this year? Where are we going this year? And I said, do you guys trust me? And they said, yeah. And I said, I'll just handle it all for you. And this is 8 CEOs all showed up to the airport. And at the time they were getting their boarding passes, they found out where they were flying to, what country, what city, where we were staying, what activities we were going to do. They found that out literally as they boarded their plane. They had no idea where they were going. So it was just a good experience of challenging myself and my peers to learn to sort of go with your instincts a little bit more and not always be so structured in a situation where the structure really didn't matter. And I obviously gave them some prep of clothes to bring and things so they weren't unprepared. Egos need to be challenged and given a framework. I think this is just as interesting as the first bullet point. You know, obviously you got to be careful in your position within your organization. You see egos at all levels of the organization. It's not something you see only at the top or the bottom, but it does have some tendencies. But I think in some cases when the facts are not correct, an ego can be challenged, or when it doesn't feel like it's suiting the group's change management framework, I think it's important to use some structure to sort of help channel somebody's energy. Egos left unchecked can really go quite rampant and can ruin culture. Egos that are given a framework can be very powerful for alignment. There are many, many books on this. Many, many years ago, with a group I studied kind of the EOS model. It is one performance model. There's 40X, which has kind of wild and portly goals. The BHAGs from the first one, the EOS model, are big, audacious goals. They're similar, they're not identical, but they're similar in ways. For those that haven't read much about sort of formal frameworks for companies and dynamics, those are just multiple models. There are professional organizations that can help your companies with these. There are books on these topics if you just want to read it for your entertainment. If you aren't aware of those or many others, I encourage you to read a couple. Who's your unit economic czar? Should it be a quiet mouse? And so what does that bullet mean? So a unit economics czar means somebody at your company, and I see this a lot with startup companies and even smaller, medium-sized companies, where they don't have the sophistication to understand their space that well, and they're just excited to get revenue and to add hires and those kinds of things. It's really important that the fundamentals are set up right. You have to make sure that if you did whatever you just did 10,000 more times, that it would turn a net result for you and your business. Okay. So the unit economics czar is somebody that needs to be accountable. Certainly the finance department can play a role here or can be an advisor. Some small companies don't even have that role or don't even have a full-time advisor like that. So depending on your company size, or even if it's just a project team, it could just be within a project, within a big company, you're taking on doing a specific team, cybersecurity project for your company right now, whatever it is, make sure that somebody understands what are the economics here. Does this scale and does this help as you increase the volume of doing this for yourself, for your customers? What needs to happen? How do we make sure that it's in check? So I just encourage you to make sure you have that. The smaller your organization, generally speaking, the more important this has to become a secondhand job. The bigger the company, usually more likely the finance organization or others will kind of keep a close eye on that. Sometimes investors or banks or loans or things will also keep a good track on that. What alliances are forming and how are they between people or areas? So it's one thing when you're a department head and you sort of get with another department head, maybe you like that person, and you say, hey, Terry, if we work together on this, do you think we can make this happen? And those two can kind of in cahoots sort of make change happen. That's a really, really common and a really good start. But it's important that it becomes a departmental alignment and not a personal alignment. It very often can get translated like Bill and Terry are doing this, as opposed to sales and ops have worked together to make sure we can hit the service levels our customers are expecting. There's a big difference in that, not only in the word choice, but in actually how the leaders communicate that change. And I will spend a few more minutes on that in a second. In terms of other experience shares that I think when people are not as respectful as they can be to other departments, when somebody says, well, that's not our fault, that's so-and-so person or department's fault. I think shadowing other areas of the business is important. In some cases, people just have no idea what another area does, right? You say, oh, I'm not an accountant. I don't know how the debits and credits work, or I don't have to deal with shipping. I'm in this department, right? It's an interesting management experience. Some companies do a very formalized, management trainee program where you rotate through, but it also could be used as a tool. If you're a leader or a manager and you're finding somebody not having maybe the respect they should for other departments, sometimes it's personal, like they're taking it out on a person. Sometimes it's their ego. Sometimes they're oversimplifying what something else is, what they don't understand. But it really helps to have them thrown into another department. Maybe they do a 1 week in another department or whatever structure works for you to make sure they have a little bit more mutual respect for what they do. In terms of leadership styles, this is really my own philosophy. I'm not sure I've ever seen this in a book anywhere, but leaders need to get dirty. Otherwise, they should curb their overrides. That's definitely my language, which is, there's different leadership styles. I personally tend to be probably too hands-on at times in my leadership style. Like I like to get dirty in terms of getting the work done, dipping down into the details, that kind of thing. But I think that there's this correlation between those that get dirty, that have the kind of chops to override, and others who just override it because they're the leader. And so I think that there's a unwritten rule in my own book, which is that, as leaders, you shouldn't be afraid to get a little bit dirty sometimes so that you can gain respect from your people and from your team, so that when you do override them, they have more respect for you, right? And so, as somebody who's run a family business that had 100 employees or as part of a bigger organization now over 1,000 employees, I'm still one of the top candidates to help plunge a toilet. Not to say that's on my resume and what I should be doing, but I'm still one of those people. And it's not to say my style should be your style, but it's a style. And I think it gets me a little bit more street credit when I'm walking with an installer and I'm talking about the wire should go this path versus that path. And it's because I've done an install. And so I think it's important that leaders understand that there's a certain level of respect. You often hear these stories about a leader who's running a company that started all the way at the bottom. What an awesome, awesome story that they earned their way up with hard work and intelligence and made their way up with integrity. And that's such a cool thing to hear. I always I'm sort of incentivized when I hear that, motivated. All right, I have one or two more slides so I can get you guys to some Q&A. Encourage trust with key resources, compliment and compensate. Take care of your people. If you like them, if you want them to be around, if you want them to be creating the culture you like, take care of your people. The one caveat I give you, the last bullet here, is that if you're a manager or a leader, it's important that you understand that a great player doesn't mean they're a good coach. So compliment them, compensate them, but don't over promote. Be careful. I've made this mistake. Many others have. I'm sure some of you have. The concept of they're really good at executing. All of a sudden, I'm going to make them a department head, or I'm going to make a manager of their team or supervisor. And they're not comfortable pushing people around, and they're not as productive. And it can lead to a path of them not being wanting to reverse back out. Compensate them well for their performance, not necessarily if they're not necessarily a good manager. It doesn't mean that they can't bend the rules a little bit on the salary band if they're in their peer group. Just think that through carefully. But what I'm really saying there is it's your fault if you promote somebody to their incompetency level. But it is your job to compliment and compensate them to make sure that they're a part of your team. All right, I want to wrap up here so that I can open it up for more Q&A. I think this is my last activity. It's actually not one I can see you do on camera, but I'll ask you to, you're optionally allowed to close your eyes if you feel comfortable. I won't know if you are, so you certainly don't have to. But think about this morning. Hopefully you brushed your teeth, whatever time zone you live in. Think about how you put your toothpaste on. Which direction did you put it on your toothbrush? Where did you start your toothbrush in your mouth? Do you start in the front? Do you start in the back? Do you start on the left, the bottom? Where do you start? Where do you end? And the concept is this: we are creatures of habit, as we've covered with both the watch and the fingers example. Pinky's out for those that mentioned the pinky joke earlier. And it's the concept that you might be somebody that brushes their teeth every day, and maybe you miss the same spot every day. If you've never tried this, if you've never injured your dominant hand, then you've been a very healthy person, maybe lucky. Try brushing your teeth tonight left-handed, or the opposite hand from your dominant hand, and it's very tricky. But what it'll do is also change the pattern of what spots you're brushing, what order, and how you're brushing. So occasionally I try to do it just for the joke with my children, but just for the sake of remembering that you don't want a habit that gets so monotonous that you forget and kind of skip that same spot every time. So hopefully that's been sort of a helpful activity. I know this one's a little less hands-on as the other two, but I just wanted to kind of share that with you. All right, I think I have one slide left. Yep, and then I'll leave a few minutes for Q&A. So communication, how does it relate to heavy business growth, and how does it relate to change management? Read these bullets as I speak through them, but two managers, leaders can explain the same change in two different ways, okay? So two different departments can explain to their teams the same thing that's happening in two different ways and accomplish two different things, or accomplish the same thing. Two different managers can explain the change using similar words and get opposite results due to their tone, due to their trust, due to the experience background they have with that working together. So you have to believe in a change and teach the why on the alternatives. I think to get change management to occur, showing what the alternative choices are makes the decision more relatable. Okay, the alternative was this, this, or this. We thought this was the best option. It's reasonable amount of spend. It's reasonable amount of time to implement it, but it's doable. All right. Ever been in a two-person canoe? And this, for any of you that are parents, this is something you may feel like you want to be a part of in terms of a cool father-son or father-daughter experience. I happened to do a triathlon back when I was skinnier and in better shape. And the person I jumped into a canoe, it was actually the oldest triathlon in Texas, which is canoeing instead of swimming, a little safer down a crazy river. But we got in the canoe. We had never done this before. We were both in physically great shape, or respectively good shape, but we were just like paddling. And we couldn't quite get the timing right. And it was because we were both trying to use all of our muscles and might to get the canoe to go fastest. It wasn't until we started paddling at the exact same time on either side of the boat. And even if the stronger person had to let up and not paddle as hard, we found all of a sudden the canoe had a pattern, and it was going straight, and it was going much, much faster and more streamlined than what we had done before. So I think it's important to make sure that you're in sync and not trying to muscle through. That was my lesson from 20, 25 years ago in that story. And I've already mentioned, know how you'll measure it before you change it. Talking bullet points before paragraphs. I struggle with too much PowerPoint. I hope today was entertaining for most of you. I think I'm getting better at using bullet points. This might be too many on a slide, but I tend to kind of speak quickly and type quickly. But this is a good format for me to sort of force out different thoughts and not make them kind of blur and smudge together. And so I've tried to get better at this due to partners recently giving me feedback on my own ability to communicate in the last couple of years. And I think it's been good for me. So I'm sticking with it and continuing to use it. And then last kind of section is some people see life through blinders, others through sunglasses. Some only see things through the numbers and others through words. You can tell somebody to do something a bunch of times, or you can measure them and put a KPI on it and say, hit the number, and you can get very different results. So understand the different kinds of personalities you're dealing with. And some have different levels of empathy. I think it's a big underestimated word in business, which is some seem to sort of have the bother and the care and others don't. So it's important to make sure you adjust and understand the natural and desired skill sets and abilities of your team members at any level, above you, below you, left of you, or right of you, so that you can adopt better. Folks, for the sake of time, I promised you I'd get done. I think I ran a little short on Q&A time. If there's any juicy questions you have, right now is the time to stick it in the chat. Any questions for me on my presentation today? I appreciate the heavy involvement from the chat. There was a few of you that, sorry, put the questions you have in the chat if you can. That would be great. In early operations at Stealth. And I'm going to just read out loud, so feel free to throw them in there. And also, out of respect for time, I do know this session is supposed to end in, I think, 5 minutes. If any of you need bathroom breaks or have to drop off, feel free, but I'm going to try to answer questions right up to the hour if desired. In early Stealth operations, what processes did you implement to ensure evidence-based ideas that citizens were being funneled to the proper parties without killing entrepreneurial spirit with the organization? Great question. Not the easiest of questions. I thank you, Nick, for challenging me a little bit. I think transparency was very straightforward in the earlier operations days. We were very lean. We were all in one building. If something went well, we would brag about it. We'd run down the hallway. We'd jump up and down. We'd buy pizza for everybody. I think it was very simple and unsophisticated in the early days. I think the other part of that makes me think of when I read your question was that we really only had a single process. We had a finite process. We had to keep it simple, silly philosophy, and that kind of kept it straightforward and down one path. In terms of being able to funnel it to the right parties, at that point, earlier days, it was easier to make those calls and to sort of share that with the right parties, but we were so intertwined in how we did things that it was sort of straightforward. I hear a lot of differentiations from scale. Some might mean it means profitability. How would you personally define scale and what it means? Best piece of advice for scaling a team. One, make sure you understand accountability for small businesses. For this is the question here about scale. Make sure you understand who's accountable for what, especially when you're small, because many of you wear many hats. Two, make sure your unit economics make sense. If we do what we just did yesterday, 1 million more times tomorrow, what does that mean for your business? Is that great? Is it overwhelming? What things break? How much money do we get? What can we afford then? How many people we have to hire? And try to make sure you understand which components are going to happen when. So I give you those fake examples to that scale question of reversing yesterday and doing it tomorrow 1 million times. What would that do to your business and why? What things would break? What people need to do? I'm starting to see some thank you notes. It looks like a couple people may have to drop off. Loaded with practical tips and tricks. Thank you. Gracias. No problem. I speak very limited Spanish, but thanks, Greg, for your attendance. Thanks, Pearson, for your question. How did you improve the effectiveness of the integration of acquisition strategy? Oh, that's a tricky question. So it depends where you are in the integration. Greg, you're welcome to follow with me offline after the session. I'll actually flip to the next slide so you guys all have my contact information below. Feel free to contact us. How did you improve the effectiveness of the integration of acquisitions? I think the single most straightforward answer I can give you is if the integration is of any material scale, make sure you have a dedicated resource to the integration. I think that's number one, right? Because everybody's doing their day job at the new and the old place, and you've got to figure out how to get blue team and red team to become the purple team, and it's not easy. So do your best to figure that out and have a strategy for making sure that all of the burden is not on people that have full-time jobs. They can certainly be part of those teams. You're going to need them, right? Get the same departments together, join forces, learn best practices. but it's really important to make sure there's some respectable party, whether they're consultants or employees, hired to be dedicated for the integration. I think that's very, very important. And then manage it. Make sure you're communicating correctly to the right people at the right times. I don't think that the change pace matters as much as the communication about the change mattering. All right, I think we have 1 minute till the hour. So I don't see any further questions. I will end. Thank you for your time today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And somebody's asking me about my DJ history. I did have a DJ business in high school called the DJ Dudes. And that does lead to some of the beginnings of my musical interests. And that is certainly why I referenced it a lot in this presentation. So I appreciate everybody's time today. Have a great day and speak soon. Please feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk about anything offline. Thank you so much.